All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Geekdom Report here for episode 2 of House of the Dragon. Like last time, we're not going to go into spoilers. I know that I mentioned a couple specific spoilers in the last episode, but today we're not going to go into any details. There are a couple plot points that I'm going to want to discuss, but I'm going to discuss them as vaguely as possible and move that over. Discuss them as vaguely as possible and kind of out of context, just so that I can mention what it is that I like about them, but not mention what exactly is happening in the story and things like that. This time I did take a couple of notes, a couple bullet points, just to because there was some specific stuff that I wanted to comment on. But just as a quick TLDR, I thought it was a good episode. This is one of those episodes that was definitely reminiscent of early Game of Thrones in terms of the politics and kind of some cloak and dagger type stuff and things getting heated with the small council and the king and stuff. And so it's just one of the things that has carried over from last week that I'm still really loving is just being back in Westeros. Like I mentioned last week, I'm such a big fan of this world, of these characters, of this lore, and it's easy to get excited about a show that starts off good, Game of Thrones being a prime example, but I'm really hoping that this is something that can carry over and that for the entire run of the show that they can keep up the quality, because the first 2 episodes at least are really solid. I'm really liking where it's going, what's happened so far. It's all just it has a lot of promise and a lot of potential, and I'm really excited about that. And it's just so exciting to be back in this world. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. Grab my tablet again. So the first thing, last week, they didn't do any sort of a theme song / intro sequence, and this week they did. And they actually used the same theme song from Game of Thrones. I don't know, theme music might be the better, probably just theme. It's not really a theme song. But it also did something similar to Game of Thrones, where it's a camera kind of flying through, and there's this sort of sculpture thing in the background, and with the map, it's a very similar idea to the intro for Game of Thrones, but changed for House of the Dragon. And I'm kind of split on bringing back the same theme. I can't deny. Well, I didn't know it was going to be the same theme, so when it went into the intro credits and it started playing the theme song, you immediately just get the goosebumps because we all love that theme. It's a beautiful piece of music, and so it's really exciting to have that come back. But at the same time, it's also a little disappointing because you kind of want to hear something new, and especially because they've gone on record as saying that this... Actually, now that I think about it, I can't remember. I think it is technically set in the same world as Game of Thrones, in the sense that both shows take place in the same universe in the show. Obviously, they're both part of the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire world, but I believe they do take place in the same timeline, canon, whatever you want to call it. And so it would have been nice to hear something new, but at the same time, that theme song is so iconic, it kind of makes sense that they brought it back. So it's... You might like that, you might not, but at least this one time, it was definitely nice to hear that theme again, because like I said, it is an iconic piece of music, and it really, nothing sends you back to Westeros quite like hearing that opening theme, which was really cool. So that was one of the things that I really liked. One of the other kind of just high level things that I have to comment on again is Millie Alcock. She is tremendous in this show. She has a few scenes where her acting is all in her eyes, in her lips, and kind of in her face and in her cheeks, and you can just see all of these emotions that her character is processing without saying a word. And it's just she's terrific. She is just so talented, and I'm really hoping... I did look up her IMDb once, and I don't remember what else she's been in, but I'm really hoping that this show can be a good jumping off point for her and that she can have a really successful career because she's incredibly talented. And I definitely think that she's going to end up being a fan favorite with the time that she's in the show. I don't know if they're going to keep her and the younger Rhaenyra in the show for all of the seasons that they have planned. I assume she'll be here for the entire first season at the very least, but I don't know because they still haven't jumped forward to the future, the older Rhaenyra, and so I don't know how they're going to balance that. So that'll be interesting to see how they balance that as the future seasons come out. But at least for the time being, she's incredibly talented, and just I really enjoy seeing her portrayal of this character and just seeing what she brings because I think she's really great. So come on, let's okay. One of the other things that I wanted to comment on is just there are a few different shots where there's just these absolutely beautiful vistas. Most of them I think are CG, especially the stuff with King's Landing is obviously CG, and there's a couple points where if you paused it and kind of got up close and looked into it, there's points where you can tell that it's pretty obviously CG. But even so, I really like seeing these vistas outside the window behind a character. Or there's one point where there's some characters walking down this path and there's these massive trees on the side, and so the shot starts higher up looking out across these trees, and then behind it is the beach and then the ocean, and it's so beautiful. And it's so beautiful, and it's just so, it's obviously having good looking vistas is not a guarantee of anything when relating to a TV show, but I also feel like there's a lot of, it's almost something that can be taken for granted these days, especially with everything, just not everything, but a lot of really high budget stuff. It's easy to forget about the background. The background is just kind of a placeholder, and even though it still takes a lot of work to get that there, especially if it's being done in CG. I remember watching a video about Spider-Man No Way Home and reading or listening to some of the visual effects artists talking about how they had to render, I can't remember how much, but they had to fully map out and render like X number of blocks of New York City to scale so that they could have their CG fight sequences going and be able to take the camera where they needed to and stuff. And so it's a ton of work that goes into this background stuff that you don't even think about. And so I really appreciate shows that can highlight those background vistas and pause for a moment and take a moment to really kind of just take it in, and it's something that I really like, and I'm really, really glad that this show has seemed to take that in. Another one of the things that I really enjoyed that I really noticed this episode are outfits and costume design. There's a point where Rhaenyra rides her dragon, and so she has kind of a dragon rider outfit, and I really, really liked the design of that outfit. I actually couldn't tell because it never gets close enough on a full body, so I couldn't tell if it was a dress or if it was pants and like a shirt, but then sort of like a cloak over it, because you see from a farther out shot her climbing off the dragon, and you can see stuff billowing around her legs, so it's obviously some sort of longer garment, but I don't know if it was a dress or if it was pants and a shirt with a cloak. But I loved how it looked, because that over the shoulders and I think over the elbows and maybe a part over the stomach or something, there was another part where it was designed almost to look like dragon scales, and then you just had kind of leather going through it. But it looked so cool, and it was just one of those outfits where you're able to stop and just take it in for a second and be like, these costume designs are awesome. And I love seeing stuff like that, because good costumes kind of like the background stuff, I feel like it's easy to take good costumes for granted, because the best kind of costumes, especially for a show like this that takes place in a medieval-like world where obviously they're not going to be wearing modern-day clothes, the better the costumes are, the less they stand out, because our brains accept that as being part of that time period. Whereas if they wear something that clearly isn't part of that time period, it stands out a lot more. And that was something that I actually noticed in the later seasons of Game of Thrones, especially with some of Sansa's outfits that she gets in season 7 and season 8, where it's just like this weird black leather type stuff. It's just not only is it not the type of stuff that they would wear during that time period, but it's even not the type of stuff that was worn earlier on in the show. As the show went on, it felt like they got more modern with their outfit designs, to the point where, for me at least, it kind of takes away from it, because you're just looking at this going, well, okay, yeah, but it just doesn't fit, you know? So at least as of right now, I feel like the costumes so far have just been really great. There's some really, really beautiful dresses and some really good looking tunics and things for the men and stuff. And it's so cool. And, I just, that one outfit in particular stood out to me, and I really liked it because I just thought it looked really neat, but it also, to me at least, it felt like it fit in that world and that it belonged there, which I really liked. There's one scene, which this is probably the most specific, so I'll keep it as vague as I can, but one of my potential concerns after episode 1 was that they weren't going to take the time or make the effort, or however you want to call it, to flesh out Damon in the sense of giving him some likable qualities. Because, and especially in the book, Damon is not a nice person, and he's selfish, and he's arrogant, and he's power hungry, and you name it, and he's got it. But to me, someone like that, that's just straight bad, is just kind of boring. It almost makes them sort of like a cartoon villain, and to me that's not interesting, because you just know inherently that a cartoon villain's going to lose. And so it's just it for me, it just doesn't work. And so one of the points that's made in the book is that Damon and Viserys have a bond, and they do love each other despite all of the problems that they have. And there's a scene where we get to see a little bit of that from Damon. We got to see someone is bad-mouthing Viserys, and Damon says, I get to say what I want about my brother, you do not. And so I really liked that, because it shows that even with all of the problems that he has with Viserys, and all of the stuff that he doesn't like about him, and I'm sure that on some level he hates him to some degree, he still respects him and has some sort of emotional attachment to him. And so I really like that, because to me it adds depth to Damon as a character. It shows that he's not just a mustache twirling cartoon villain who rapes and kills and revels in all of this debauchery. He does do all of that, but it just helps add a little bit of a new layer to the character, and that's something that I really like, and I hope that we get to see more of as the show goes on, especially in the book. There, and I won't get into specifics, but there's a few other characters that Damon seems to have more of a relationship with, and so I'm hoping that will help us get behind him, not get behind him, but get into his head a little bit, because he's not a good guy, don't get me wrong, and so we're never going to be rooting for him in the sense of, yeah, this guy needs to win because would be a good leader, and no, he's terrible. But to me, it's vastly more interesting when characters have those dimensions, and you can explore them a little bit and see that they're not all 100% straight up evil and bad, and I really like that. So that it was only just one scene and that one line, and it was pretty quick, but that was something that gives me hope that as the show goes on, they are going to properly pay that off and show that Damon does, to a degree, care about people other than himself. And so I really like that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that return and grow as the show goes on. I only have 2 notes for things that I didn't like this episode. Kind of continuing something from episode 1. There's a couple of shots with the dragons where it just looks kind of wonky. Mostly it happens with interactions between the people and the dragons. So one of the shots I'm thinking of is when Rhaenyra is riding her dragon. There's just a couple shots where it's pretty obvious that she's in front of a green screen, and it just doesn't fit. And I know that that's a really difficult problem to solve, especially because even though this is a TV show, and for a TV show, it has a really high budget. If I recall, it has a budget of $20 million per episode, which is more than I think Game of Thrones had even in season 8. So the budget is really high, but that's a problem, that trying to get that interaction between live action and CG with something as big as a dragon is, and that can be as agile, that's a really hard problem to solve. And so it's one of those things that I notice, and it's just kind of like, oh, well, that's a little annoying, but it's not a serious problem, because, to me at least, because I know that that's a limitation of basically interacting with dragons. And especially with a person who's climbing on and off of a dragon and riding the dragon, that's something that it makes sense. And so I'll notice it and make a note of it and then just move on, because I know that's going to happen. Also, the other thing that I noticed that was, again, just a kind of a minor nitpick, but something that I noticed was, I remember when the reviews first dropped for the show, a lot of them were talking about how terrible the wigs were with the white hair. And especially in a lot of the pre-release screenshots that they released, they did look bad. Like, I thought they looked terrible. But throughout these first 2 episodes, honestly, I think they look fine. I remember seeing a couple pictures of Matt Smith specifically and thinking he looked absolutely ridiculous with the white hair. But in the show, I think he looks great, Like, it's obviously that's not his natural hair color, but my brain has processed it. The wig, obviously there's not a lot of people with hair that color, but in terms of the look of the hair and everything like that, it looks like real hair. And so it's not a big problem to me, except there's a point where King Viserys is talking to Laena. Why does that not seem right? I'm pretty sure that's right, but Lord Corlys's daughter, her wig looked bad. And I don't know if that's because she's a younger kid. In the show, she's 12. I don't know how old the actress actually is. If you would have asked me, I would have guessed probably like 9 or 10. So it's possible that she's younger or older. I don't know. But so she's a younger kid, and the hair is really kind of poofy on the top, and then it goes back. It almost looks like Elaine's hair from Seinfeld, in terms of, because her hair is kind of a little poofy, and it's really curly and then just kind of goes back. Lena's hair kind of looks like that, except it's white, obviously, but it's curlier and kind of poofy, and so her hair, the poofy part, looked really big for her head. It made her face and her head look really small, and it looked really bad, honestly. That's the only wig that I've seen up through these 2 episodes that made me go, ugh, that looks kind of bad, like that does not look great. But other than that, to me at least, I think all of the wigs look fine. Like I said, obviously that's not realistic hair. I don't know of anyone, at least in my life, that has hair that actually looks like that in terms of that shade of white, but it's a fantasy show, so obviously that's, just part of the territory. So anyways, that's kind of the main gist. Even if I wanted to break this episode down kind of scene by scene, in a way, there's not a lot that happened, to just in the way of, I don't feel like a breakdown would be interesting, but that's just me. Overall, though, I liked it. I was really engaged for the whole episode. It was really fun to not only be back in Westeros, but to be part of the those politics again, and kind of the secrets and the cloak and dagger and power struggles, and all of that was really interesting. And I really, really liked being back in this world. So it's definitely a solid second episode. As of right now, the first episode was not a fluke. We have 2 good episodes of the show so far. I'm really hoping that they can pay this off, and that the show will end up being as good as it can be, because despite all the flaws of Game of Thrones, this is a world that definitely deserves a lot of love and attention. And so I'm really hoping that we get to see it going forward. So thanks for watching if you guys made it this far, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya.